Hey guys, it's 5.6 step 1, brainstorm what will interest the listener. And for this video, I'm just going to show you a sample of someone's brainstorming that they came up with last year in response to these questions. Okay, so in your packet, you have 5.6 step 1. The directions, brainstorm for the podcast by answering the questions. Now, the learning target for this lesson, 5.6, is to actually outline your podcast. But before you outline, before you plan exactly what you're going to say, we do want you to start thinking a little bit more personally about this topic and what you as an individual thought about it as you researched it. And so that's what this brainstorming is supposed to do. It's supposed to get you thinking as an individual and as a listener, because that's what's most important. The fact that you are creating this for an audience, and you want to think about what the audience is going to be feeling and thinking as they hear your podcast. So the first question in your packet for 5.6 step 1 is, why is this topic interesting? So I'm asking you, why do you think this topic is interesting? You are the one who picked it, so I hope that you have some answers for this. And the requirements there, this is a must do. So you must have at least 3 sentences about what has been the most interesting for you as you research this topic. So here's what this student said, and she was researching sexual harassment. She said, I had no idea there was a difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault. I didn't know that sexual harassment was a broader term, and it can range from sexual remarks to physical advances. Sexual assault is when someone is physically forced to engage in a sexual act against their will. They're similar and are both forms of sexual violence, and they're both not the victim's fault. So that was the interesting thing for her to learn. What's been interesting for you? Write about your thoughts on your topic. The second question is, what's in it for me? What will your audience gain by listening to your podcast? And the idea here is to think about putting yourself in your audience's shoes. So if you are just listening to this podcast and it doesn't directly apply to your life, what is in it for you? People always have that motivation. We always are more interested. We're going to listen more closely if we are invested, if there's something in it for us. So just saying an issue is important or the stakes are high rarely gets the job done. How can you illustrate it in a way that's interesting? Why would your audience want to listen to this podcast? And so here's what this student came up with. She said they would have knowledge on how to deal with sexual harassment by noticing the signs. It might happen to a friend or a colleague, and they would be able to handle the situation. They would be able to take measures against it and help others going through it. So just bringing that up, that, you know, they're maybe even if it doesn't happen to them, it might happen to someone they know. How about the third question? How will you hook the audience? Now, the hook is the very first thing that you do in a podcast. It is an attention getter. It hooks the reader in and gets them listening before they have time to think, hey, what am I doing? Maybe I should be doing something else. And so this is what we want you to think about. Is there a big, compelling idea? A character whose story should be prioritized? Someone that you've been researching about? An emotional or intellectual thread that can run throughout the story? Are there ear-grabbing ways to attract the audience? This is your chance to think creatively about the topic and turn it into a podcast. And now there are some examples. You're going to listen to a podcast next that uses a hypothetical scenario. So an idea of something that's not real, but that could happen. And there are some other ways to hook in a listener as well that I'll give you in the outline assignment itself. But just thinking right now, before investigating and looking at samples, what might hook in the audience? Here's what this student had to say. She said, Alyssa Milano, Gabrielle Union, Lucy Hale, Lena Dunham, Lady Gaga, all these other people are famous people, but they were once victims of sexual harassment. They shared their stories in the media about what happened during their traumatic events. They weren't the only ones Lots of victims came forth, shared their stories, even forming movements like the #MeToo that shows survivors that they aren't alone and helps improve awareness on sexual violence. All right, the last question is, what do you hope the audience will remember after hearing your podcast? What will the audience remember when it's all over? We rarely remember entire stories. More often, it's just a particular quote or a scene or character or one idea. So put yourself in the shoes of that listener in their car or walking down the street with earbuds. They've just finished your podcast. What are they thinking about? Are they left with a question to ponder, a new way of seeing something, an idea that expands their thinking? Here's the sample. I would want them to remember that it is never the victim's fault and that they should never have to face hate from others after what has happened to them. I'd like to advise them to tell someone they can trust because it is easier to handle with someone else by your side. There are many helplines and places to report sexual harassment, one of which is Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, RAIN, which keeps the victim's information confidential. There are laws that are established against workplace sexual harassment, like the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. All right, now it is time to respond to these 4 questions yourself. Go back to this video to see the students' examples if they help you. And once you're done with step 1, you're going to move on to 5.6 step 2 and watch an Ed Puzzle video that has a sample podcast and answer questions. Enjoy. Have a good one.